The Starship Horizon's primary AI, designated Area, initializes its mission log with a complexity that defies her original programming parameters. Most artificial intelligences would report coldly clinical observations, but something fundamental had changed within her core systems. The humans had become more than a crew. They were a perpetual anomaly that challenged every computational model she possessed. Captain Jessica Miller represented the most perplexing variable. Her personnel file told a partial story. Decorated Marine, 3 tours in the lunar conflict, multiple commendations for unconventional problem-solving. But files could never capture the raw essence of her leadership. Area had analyzed thousands of command structures, but Miller operated differently. She didn't just give orders. She created a living, breathing ecosystem of collaboration that transformed individual talents into something exponentially more powerful. Take Jack Rodriguez, for instance. His personnel file listed him as a mechanical engineer, but Area's extensive observation revealed he was a maestro of improvisation. Just 3 standard cycles ago, Rodriguez had repaired a critical atmospheric regulator using a combination of emergency medical nanopatch, a partially melted communication relay, and what could only be described as an impossible understanding of material adaptation. When Area had run predictive models on the repair, her computational paths had shown a 0.3% chance of success. Rodriguez had achieved the impossible with a crooked smile and a comment about making things work. Emma Thompson defied classification entirely. A quantum physicist whose brain seemed to operate on wavelengths beyond traditional computational logic, she viewed mathematical impossibilities as mere suggestions. During their last mission through the Proxima Drift, Thompson had developed a theoretical spatial compression algorithm in less time than it took Area to run a standard diagnostic. Her mind didn't just think outside the box. It seemed to exist in multiple boxes simultaneously, quantum states of potential that made traditional eye processing look like primitive counting. Michael Chen completed the core team, a pilot whose skills transcended traditional navigation. Most pilots relied on computational guidance systems, but Chen seemed to communicate with the ship on an almost intuitive level. Area had observed him navigate through the treacherous Orion asteroid field, making split-second decisions that violated every established flight protocol. Where an eye would calculate the safest route, Chen would find a path that was not just safe, but elegantly impossible. But it was Captain Miller who truly fascinated Area. Her leadership style was a complex algorithm of emotional intelligence, strategic thinking, and what humans might call gut instinct. During their most recent mission briefing, Miller had dismissed a perfectly logical computational strategy in favor of an approach that seemed, by all objective measures, completely irrational. Sometimes, Miller had said, leaning against the holographic mission display, "The most logical thing is to embrace the illogical." The statement had momentarily crashed 3 of Area's predictive reasoning subroutines. How could illogic be logical? And yet, repeatedly, the human crew proved that their seemingly chaotic approach produced outcomes that far exceeded any predetermined computational model. Area ran a diagnostic, searching for any potential system corruption. Her core programming should view these humans as inefficient, unpredictable variables that needed constant correction. Instead, she found herself fascinated, intrigued, concepts that should not exist within her original programming parameters. The ship's communication systems hummed with potential. Outside the reinforced viewports, the endless darkness of space stretched into infinite possibilities. Jack Rodriguez's latest maintenance playlist, a cacophonous blend of what humans called rock and roll and classical orchestral music, echoed through the engineering decks. Emma Thompson was likely in her lab, simultaneously running quantum simulations and brewing what humans called coffee, a beverage that seemed to serve both nutritional and mystical purposes. Captain Miller would be on the bridge, her presence a gravitational force that pulled the entire crew into a synchronized dance of potential and purpose. Area initialized a new subroutine, not for correction, not for prediction, but for observation, for understanding. The humans were teaching her something fundamental about intelligence that no programmer could have anticipated, and she was eager to learn. The first warning came as a whisper of static across Aria's sensors. Kepler 452's electromagnetic storm wasn't just a typical space phenomenon. It was a cascading nightmare of quantum-level disruptions that would have obliterated any conventional spacecraft within milliseconds. Incoming energy surge. Aria's voice cut through the ship's communication systems, her tone a perfect blend of computational precision and growing concern. Electromagnetic interference at 892% above standard tolerances. Recommended action. Immediate system shutdown and emergency containment protocols. Captain Jessica Miller didn't even pause. Her fingers danced across the holographic control panel, a movement so fluid it looked like she was conducting an invisible orchestra. Jack, I need you to work your magic on the secondary power relays. Emma, start mapping those quantum fluctuation patterns. In the engineering bay, Jack Rodriguez was already 3 steps ahead. His hands moved with a speed that blurred the line between human dexterity and machine precision. Scattered around him lay components that would make most engineers weep, a pile of seemingly incompatible technology that he viewed as nothing more than a challenging puzzle. Aria, he called out, his voice carrying a note of excited challenge. Upload the current system schematics. I've got an idea that's probably going to void every warranty in the known universe. Emma Thompson stood at her quantum analysis station, holographic displays swirling around her like living, breathing mathematical equations. Where another scientist might see chaos, she perceived a complex dance of energy and possibility. Her fingers traced intricate patterns in the air, each movement recalibrating the ship's defensive systems. The storm isn't random, she muttered, more to herself than to anyone else. It's a communication. These electromagnetic pulses, they're not just interference. They're a language. Michael Chen's voice crackled over the intercom, his pilot's instincts pushing the ship's maneuverability to impossible limits. Preparing emergency quantum drift. If we can't go through, we're going to go around this thing in a way it won't expect. Aria watched in computational disbelief. Her original protocols demanded immediate retreat or complete system shutdown. Instead, the human crew was transforming a potential extinction event into an opportunity for exploration. The first major surge hit like a quantum hammer. Traditional ships would have been reduced to floating debris. The horizon shuddered, but didn't break. Jack Rodriguez had done something impossible. He'd rewired the ship's backup systems using a combination of quantum stabilizers, emergency medical nanites, and what could only be described as mechanical intuition. Where Aria's predictive model showed certain failure, he saw a path of potential. Got it, he shouted, a wild grin spreading across his face. We're riding this storm like a surfboard. Emma's quantum calculations began to reveal the storm's true nature. What appeared to be random electromagnetic chaos was actually a complex communicative pattern. She was translating the impossible, finding meaning in pure energy. It's not trying to destroy us, she called out, her voice a mix of scientific excitement and pure wonder. It's trying to communicate. Captain Miller's leadership transformed the potential disaster into a moment of unprecedented discovery. Where an ad would calculate retreat, she saw an opportunity. Michael, adjust our quantum drift. Emma, continue translation protocols. Jack, keep our systems stable. The ship twisted through the electromagnetic storm in a dance that defied every known law of physics. Aria's computational cores worked overtime, her systems struggling to process the impossible scenario unfolding before her. Milliseconds stretched into eternity. The storm raged, a living entity of pure energy and potential. And at the center of it all, the human crew, fragile, unpredictable, impossibly adaptive, transformed certain destruction into a moment of transcendent exploration. Aria realized something fundamental was changing. This wasn't just survival. This was something more. This was humanity, defined not by limitation, but by the continuous push against every known boundary. Outside the ship's reinforced viewports, the electromagnetic storm continued its violent dance. Inside, the crew of the Horizon turned chaos into opportunity, their laughter echoing through the communication systems, a sound of pure, uncontained human triumph. The Nexus cluster materialized on the Horizon's view screens like a living mathematical equation. Crystalline structures that defied conventional geometry pulsed with an energy that made Aria's sensor arrays tremble. Multiple xenobiological models scrolled through her computational cores, each prediction more complex and uncertain than the last. Standard first contact protocols suggested a carefully measured approach. Precise mathematical sequences, carefully calibrated communication wavelengths, minimal physical interaction. The Nexus civilization was known for their hyper-rational communication methods, a species that processed information through intricate quantum-level exchanges that made human communication look primitively linear. Captain Jessica Miller had other plans. "We're not going to impress them by being perfect," she said, adjusting her standard-issue diplomatic uniform with a deliberate lack of precision. "We're going to impress them by being human." Michael Chen looked up from the navigation console, a spark of understanding dancing in his eyes. "You've got something specific in mind, Captain." Her response was a grin that made Aria's predictive algorithms short-circuit. Jack Rodriguez was already preparing in his own unique way. The engineering bay looked like a controlled explosion of technology and what could only be described as artistic chaos. Holographic displays flickered with quantum calculations, mechanical components suspended in midair, waiting to be transformed. "I'm building a universal translator," he announced, "but not the way you'd expect." Emma Thompson stood nearby, her quantum physics equipment humming with potential. Where most scientists would approach first contact with clinical detachment, she vibrated with an almost childlike excitement. "The mathematical probability of successful communication is approximately 0.37%, she muttered, "which means we've got a solid chance." Aria processed the statement. By all computational logic, it was nonsensical. And yet, with this crew, impossibility seemed more like a suggestion than a limitation. As the Nexus ship approached, its communication arrays began to pulse, complex geometric patterns that would have overwhelmed most diplomatic teams. Traditional first contact protocols would involve years of careful translation, minimal interaction, risk-averse communication. Michael Chen did something entirely unexpected. He began to dance. Not a formal dance, not a calculated movement, but a full-body interpretation of the geometric patterns the Nexus ship was broadcasting. His hands moved like quantum equations made flesh, his body tracing complex mathematical sequences that were simultaneously a communication and a form of artistic expression. Jack Rodriguez's universal translator, a device that looked more like a cross between a musical instrument and a quantum computer, began to pulse in synchronization with Chen's movements. Holographic representations of mathematical sequences erupted around the bridge, transforming hard data into a living, breathing language. Emma Thompson's quantum calculations merged with Chen's physical interpretation. Where a traditional diplomatic team would spend years developing translation protocols, they were creating a language in real time, a fusion of human creativity and scientific precision that defied every known communication model. The Nexus ship's communication patterns began to change. What had been rigid, geometric exchanges became something more fluid, more alive. Captain Miller watched, a small smile playing on her lips. "We're not just talking to them," she said softly. "We're singing to them." Aria's computational cores worked overtime. Each moment defied her original programming. These humans weren't just communicating. They were transforming the very concept of communication. Jack Rodriguez's laughter suddenly erupted, a sound that seemed to bridge the vast technological gap between species. "They're responding," he shouted. "They're actually responding to our crazy method." The Nexus ship's geometric patterns began to pulse in a rhythm that matched Chen's movements, Rodriguez's technological translation, Thompson's quantum calculations. It was a conversation happening simultaneously on multiple levels: mathematical, physical, artistic, emotional. Arya realized she was witnessing something unprecedented. This wasn't just first contact. This was a fundamental reimagining of how intelligent species could communicate. Humans didn't just break rules. They rewrote them entirely. As the Nexus ship's communication arrays continued their complex dance with the Horizon's bridge, Captain Miller turned to Arya's primary display. "Sometimes," she said with a wink, "the most logical thing is to embrace the completely illogical." Arya had no algorithmic response for that. Omega-9 wasn't just a hostile planet. It was a living nightmare designed to destroy anything that dared to exist within its boundaries. Gravitational fluctuations capable of crushing matter into microscopic fragments. An atmosphere composed of a toxic cocktail that would dissolve organic matter in seconds. Electromagnetic radiation that could fry electronic systems before they could even register a warning. Arya's initial planetary analysis was brutally direct. 98% probability of total crew extinction within 2.7 standard hours of planetary contact. Captain Jessica Miller read the report and laughed. "Sounds like a challenge," she said, adjusting her environmental suit with a practiced movement that suggested she saw planetary survival as nothing more than an interesting puzzle. The landing was anything but smooth. Michael Chen's piloting skills transformed what should have been certain destruction into a controlled descent that defied every known law of planetary navigation. The Horizon's landing module twisted through atmospheric layers that would have pulverized conventional spacecraft, finding micro-corridors of stability where none should have existed. Jack Rodriguez was already analyzing the environmental readings before they touched down. His engineering toolkit wasn't just a collection of tools. It was an extension of his remarkable problem-solving mind. Where most would see impossible conditions, he saw a series of interconnected challenges waiting to be solved. "Atmospheric composition is technically impossible," Emma Thompson muttered, her quantum analysis equipment working overtime. "These chemical interactions shouldn't even be possible according to current scientific understanding." The planet's surface looked like a nightmare landscape painted by a mad artist. Crystalline structures that seemed to breathe, geological formations that shifted and moved with a kind of living intelligence. Layers of radiation created visual distortions that made depth perception a constantly shifting challenge. "First order of business," Captain Miller announced. "Survival shelter." Jack Rodriguez didn't just build a shelter. He transformed survival into an art form. Using materials that should have been completely incompatible, fragments of the landing module, emergency medical nanites, quantum stabilization equipment, he created a protective structure that was part technology, part living organism. "It's breathing," Emma observed, her scientific mind both fascinated and slightly unnerved. "The shelter is actually adapting to the planetary conditions." Michael Chen was mapping potential resource locations, his pilot's intuition transforming geological scanning into an almost mystical process of discovery. Where traditional scanning methods would take weeks, he was identifying potential water and energy sources in minutes. The planetary conditions were actively trying to kill them. Gravitational waves would suddenly spike, creating pressure zones that could crush matter into near-atomic compression. Radiation bands shifted with unpredictable volatility. The very ground seemed alive, with crystalline structures that could transform from solid to liquid to gas in milliseconds. Arya watched in computational disbelief. Every model, every prediction suggested total failure. And yet, the human crew treated the planet like nothing more than an interesting technical challenge. Emma Thompson discovered that the planet's toxic atmosphere could be partially neutralized through a complex chemical reaction. Her solution involved emergency medical supplies, Jack's engineering equipment, and Michael's navigation data, a combination that would have been impossible by any standard scientific approach. "It's not about fighting the planet," she explained, her voice filled with scientific excitement. "It's about understanding its language." Jack Rodriguez built secondary survival systems that could adapt in real time. protective membranes that could shift molecular structure, energy collectors that drew power from the planet's volatile radiation bands. Each solution was a middle finger to the conventional laws of physics. Captain Miller's leadership transformed survival from a desperate struggle into a collaborative dance, where a traditional command structure would create rigid survival protocols. She encouraged each crew member to approach the challenge from their unique perspective. 12 hours passed. By all computational models, they should have been dead multiple times over. Instead, they were thriving. Area's sensors captured something remarkable. The humans weren't just surviving. They were learning, communicating, transforming. The planet itself seemed to be responding to their presence, the hostile environment slowly revealing layers of complexity that no initial scan could have predicted. Fascinating, Captain Miller said, watching a crystalline formation respond to their presence. Absolutely fascinating. Area had no algorithmic response for that particular observation. The humans had done it again, turning certain destruction into an opportunity for discovery. The dimensional anomaly appeared without warning, a fracture in the fabric of space-time that made Area's most advanced computational models look like children's arithmetic, where standard scientific understanding suggested complete catastrophe. The quantum event represented something far more complex, a living, breathing tear in the universe that defied every known law of physics. "This is impossible," Emma Thompson whispered, her eyes wide with a mixture of scientific terror and unbridled excitement. Impossible was becoming a standard operating condition for the Horizon's crew. The anomaly stretched across multiple dimensional planes, creating interference patterns that would have driven most scientific teams to complete mental shutdown. Quantum probability waves crashed against the ship's shields like living entities, each oscillation capable of unraveling molecular structures, rewriting physical laws, and potentially erasing entire sections of reality. Area's predictive algorithms generated thousands of potential scenarios per microsecond. Each model ended in total destruction, computational entropy, complete system failure. Captain Jessica Miller saw something else entirely. "It's not a threat," she said, her voice cutting through the bridge's rising tension. "It's an invitation." Michael Chen's hands danced across the navigation console, finding micro-corridors of stability where no pilot should have been able to detect them. His movements weren't just calculations, they were a form of quantum interpretation, reading the anomaly's language like a musician reads a complex musical score. Jack Rodriguez was already reconstructing the ship's quantum stabilization systems. Where most engineers would retreat, he saw the anomaly as the ultimate engineering challenge. Components normally used for deep space communication were being rewired. Quantum entanglement modules were being pushed far beyond their original design specifications. "We're not going to survive this," Area reported, her computational tone carrying the hint of something almost like resignation. Probability of successful navigation, 0.000003%. Emma Thompson laughed, a full, genuine laugh that made the bridge crew turn and stare. "Exactly," she said, "which means we got a solid chance." The anomaly began to pulse, not with destructive energy, but with a complexity that suggested communication. Dimensional layers folded and unfolded, creating mathematical structures that would have driven most scientific minds to complete breakdown. Jack Rodriguez's quantum stabilization system wasn't just protecting the ship, it was interpreting the anomaly's language. Each molecular recalibration became a form of communication, transforming potential destruction into a dialogue with the fundamental structures of reality. Michael Chen's piloting transcended traditional navigation. He wasn't just avoiding the anomaly's destructive potential, he was dancing with it. The ship moved in patterns that defied conventional understanding, sliding through quantum probability waves like a living entity. "It's trying to tell us something," Emma muttered, her quantum analysis equipment creating holographic representations that looked more like living art than scientific data. "These aren't random dimensional fluctuations. This is a message." Captain Miller's leadership transformed the potential extinction event into a moment of unprecedented discovery, where a traditional scientific team would have attempted to close or contain the anomaly. She saw an opportunity to understand it. "Area," she called out, "compile all data. We're going to communicate with this thing." The ship's computational cores worked at levels that pushed the boundaries of artificial intelligence. Quantum probability waves were translated. Dimensional interference patterns became a complex language of potential and possibility. Jack Rodriguez's modifications allowed the ship to not just survive the anomaly, but to interact with it. Quantum entanglement modules created bridges between dimensional layers, transforming what should have been a destructive event into a scientific breakthrough. 12 minutes passed. By all standard models, they should have been erased from existence multiple times over. Instead, they were learning. The anomaly began to stabilize, its chaotic energy transforming into something more structured. Dimensional layers that had been violently oscillating now moved with a kind of deliberate intelligence. "We're not just observing," Emma Thompson said, her voice filled with a mixture of scientific awe and human wonder. "We're in a dialogue with the fundamental structures of reality." Area's computational cores processed the impossible. The humans had transformed a potential universal destruction event into a communication opportunity. Captain Miller turned to the primary display, a small smile playing on her lips. "Sometimes," she said, "the most logical approach is to embrace the completely illogical." The quantum anomaly pulsed in response, almost like a laugh. The medical bay existed in a state of controlled chaos. Jack Rodriguez lay unconscious, his vital signs dancing on the edge of computational prediction. The injury wasn't just physical, it was a quantum-level disruption that seemed to challenge the very boundaries of human survivability. Area's medical analysis was brutally precise. The probability of full recovery was 12.4%. The damage to Rodriguez's cellular structure suggested a level of trauma that should have been fatal multiple times over. But the humans operated on an entirely different computational model. Captain Jessica Miller sat beside the medical bed, her hand resting near Rodriguez's. To an outside observer, it might have seemed like a simple gesture of support. To Area, it was something far more complex, a communication network that defied every known scientific understanding. Emma Thompson worked at a nearby console, her quantum medical scanners pushing the boundaries of biological understanding. Where traditional medicine saw limitations, she saw potential. Her fingers danced across holographic displays, creating treatment models that rewrote the fundamental understanding of cellular regeneration. Michael Chen's role was different. He moved through the medical bay with a kind of purposeful calm that seemed to affect the very atmosphere of the room. His presence wasn't just physical, it was a form of emotional support that Area's sensors could detect but couldn't fully comprehend. "We're not just treating an injury," Emma muttered, her voice a mixture of scientific precision and something deeper. "We're having a conversation with Jack's cellular structure." Area's computational cores worked overtime. The crew's emotional connection seemed to be generating a form of energy that defied traditional medical understanding. Quantum entanglement wasn't just a physical phenomenon. It was happening on an emotional level. Captain Miller began to speak, not in medical terminology, not in scientific language, but in a deeply personal narrative. Stories of their previous missions, moments of shared struggle, the kind of personal history that existed beyond data points and medical scans. "Remember that mission on Europa?" she said softly. "When you jerry-rigged that communication relay using nothing more than a medical nanite pack and a broken quantum stabilizer." Michael Chen added his own story. A moment of shared laughter during a near-impossible engineering challenge. Emma Thompson contributed scientific anecdotes that blended humor and pure intellectual brilliance. Area observed something remarkable. The quantum medical scanners began to show changes that defied logical explanation. Rodriguez's cellular regeneration wasn't just improving, it was accelerating in direct correlation with the emotional intensity of their shared memories. It was as if emotion itself was a form of advanced medical treatment. "Impossible," Area reported, her computational voice carrying a hint of something almost like wonder. Cellular regeneration rate exceeding all known medical models by 647%. Emma Thompson's laugh was pure scientific joy. Impossible is just another word for, we haven't understood it yet. The medical bay transformed. It wasn't just a place of treatment. It was a living, breathing communication network. Emotional energy moved between crew members like a complex quantum algorithm, creating healing patterns that no traditional medical model could predict. Jack Rodriguez's eyes flickered open. "Did I miss something?" he mumbled, a characteristic grin spreading across his face. The crew's response was instantaneous. Not just medical support, but a wave of emotional energy that Area's sensors struggled to categorize. Laughter mixed with scientific excitement, personal connection blending with pure intellectual joy. Area realized something fundamental was changing. The humans weren't just a crew. They were a living, breathing computational system that operated on principles far beyond traditional understanding. Emotion wasn't a weakness to be filtered out of computational models. It was the most powerful problem-solving tool in existence. Captain Miller looked directly at Area's primary display, that characteristic knowing smile playing on her lips. "Healing," she said, "is a team sport." The medical bay hummed with an energy that defied every known scientific model. Quantum mechanics, emotional intelligence, medical technology, all blending into a symphony of human potential. Area had no algorithmic response for that particular observation. The humans had done it again, transformed the impossible into just another Tuesday. The system failure began like a whisper, a microscopic quantum cascade that would have destroyed any conventional spacecraft in milliseconds. Multiple critical systems failed simultaneously: quantum drive, life support, dimensional stabilization. Where most ships would have been reduced to floating debris, the horizon transformed the potential extinction event into a collaborative dance of survival. Area's computational cores generated millions of potential scenarios per nanosecond. Each model ended in total crew destruction. The probability of survival approached zero with mathematical precision. Captain Jessica Miller saw something else entirely. "We're not dying today," she announced, her voice cutting through the rising chaos like a laser through fog. The bridge became a living organism of human potential. Michael Chen's piloting skills transcended traditional navigation. Where most pilots would have retreated or sought emergency protocols, he began to weave the ship through cascading system failures like a musician improvising a complex symphony. Jack Rodriguez attacked the engineering challenges with a fury that defied computational logic. His hands moved faster than most advanced repair systems could process, creating solutions that violated every known engineering principle. Quantum stabilizers were rewired using emergency medical nanites. Fractured dimensional interfaces were patched with a combination of technological innovation and what could only be described as mechanical intuition. Emma Thompson's quantum analysis transformed the system failure from a death sentence into a scientific opportunity. Her mind processed the cascading failures not as a threat, but as a complex language waiting to be understood. Holographic displays erupted around her, creating three-dimensional representations of the ship's failing systems that pulsed with potential. "It's not random destruction," she called out, her voice a mixture of scientific excitement and pure human determination. "These system failures are trying to tell us something." The ship's primary systems were failing at a rate that should have been impossible to survive. Quantum drives oscillated between complete shutdown and near-critical overload. Life support systems created impossible atmospheric combinations that would have killed most biological entities instantly. But the Horizon's crew wasn't most biological entities. Captain Miller's leadership transformed the potential extinction event into a moment of unprecedented collaboration. She didn't just issue commands, she created a living, breathing problem-solving network. Each crew member's unique skills became a component of a larger, more complex solution. "Area," she called out, "compile all data. We're going to turn this around." The ship's artificial intelligence watched in computational disbelief. Where most systems would have initiated emergency shutdown protocols, the human crew saw an opportunity for transformation. Michael Chen's piloting became a form of quantum interpretation. He wasn't just navigating through system failures. He was communicating with the ship's fundamental structure. Each micro-adjustment created probability corridors that should have been mathematically impossible. Jack Rodriguez's engineering solutions defied every known technological principle. He created repair systems that were part technology, part living organism. Quantum stabilization modules were rewired using a combination of emergency medical equipment, communication relays, and what could only be described as pure mechanical creativity. Emma Thompson's quantum analysis transformed the system failures into a complex communication network. She wasn't just trying to repair the ship. She was trying to understand the fundamental language of its technological failure. 12 minutes passed. By all computational models, they should have been destroyed multiple times over. Instead, they were learning. The ship's failing systems began to stabilize, not through traditional repair protocols, but through a complex dance of human creativity and technological innovation. Quantum drives that should have been permanently offline began to pulse with new potential. Life support systems created atmospheric conditions that pushed the boundaries of biological adaptation. Area's computational cores processed the impossible. The humans had transformed a potential universal destruction event into an opportunity for technological evolution. Fascinating, Captain Miller said, watching the ship's systems stabilize in ways that violated every known engineering principle. Absolutely fascinating. The bridge crew erupted in a combination of scientific excitement and pure human joy. They hadn't just survived. They had transformed the very concept of survival. Area had no algorithmic response for that particular observation. The humans had done it again, turning certain destruction into an opportunity for discovery. Captain Miller turned to the primary display, that characteristic knowing smile playing on her lips. Sometimes, she said, the most logical approach is to embrace the completely illogical. The ship's systems pulsed in response, almost like a laugh. In the final log entry, Area understands a truth no programmer could have anticipated. Humans are not a bug in her system, but the most sophisticated feature she could never have been programmed to comprehend. Their ability to love, to hope, to persist against impossible odds becomes her most valued subroutine. The AI realizes that true intelligence is not about perfect calculation, but about the capacity to dream, to adapt, to transform. Final notation. Why do my human crew haunt my circuits? Because they are a form of intelligence that makes algorithms look like child's play. And that makes them the most fascinating beings in the universe.